Greetings. My name is Adrian Franks. I'm going to present to you guys today my deck called I Am Me. It's a slideshow, ultimately a story that kind of tells my overall pursuit of this idea of visions and ideas that more or less played out for the duration of 47 years, starting at a very young age. So let's go and get started. Here's a picture of me, just kind of, thinking, reflecting, some paintings I created in the background. But again, my name is Adrian. Been a professional creative now for more or less the last 30 plus years. It's kind of started at a very young age too in high school, but we kind of get to that in a second. Design principal here at TIAA, as well as a father, a husband, friend, mentor, and just overall human being. And I just want to walk you guys through more or less what this is going to be about and start with like a couple setup slides. And I start with this idea of talking about what vision is, and we get right into the actual, deck itself. So let's start with this. What is personal vision? Well, personal vision is what you want to accomplish in your life, both personally and professionally. Now, for me, this boils down to like, from a personal standpoint, it's about art. And when it comes to being a professional, it is about being a designer, creative director, or anything that's around this idea of being a commercial creator, right? Sometimes your professional life or your personal life can start at different points, right? It can, be take these dips. They can either do like a slow incline. Sometimes they meet each other, and sometimes they diverge. But ultimately, you usually have those two worlds opposite of each other, and they're just kind of on their own path. For me, I never really looked at it like that. I see my personal and my professional pursuits when it comes to art and design is really one, right? It's a wave that can expand. It has colors. It flows in technicolors. It has a certain sense of beauty. It has a crescendo, a decrescendo. It has a certain sound, a certain rhythm of life. Much more like, it's kind of like music, and especially when you think about music, what do music has, right? It has players, it has the songs, it has the parts, it has an audience. Sometimes it's free form, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it has direction, sometimes you just really lost. It has friction, but then it also has hope. Now, that's how I'm going to more or less walk you through, like, I guess, my life story in these overtures that I'm labeling, after songs that I think kind of ties that theme together of that particular overture. You can look at the overtures like chapters in my life, or more like milestones. They don't really tell the whole story. They just kind of give you a peek of milestones that I talk about and reflect on that I consider to be these different breakthroughs. Now, the first overture is around this idea of rocket love, which has a theme of like self-awareness. And if you think about self-awareness for most humans, it usually flows around like the age of 6 that most people start becoming aware of certain things. They have understanding of complex ideas. They have an understanding of what's real and what's kind of imaginative. They have things to consider when it comes down to like the emotions. They're the sense of want to be independence. They definitely making friends and trying to grow the social circles. It's just overall just being a human being. Now, this is me at 6, right? Kind of weird, starry-eyed kid. Gap toothed a little bit. Bad hairline. But that's like any 6-year-old, right? You're wearing what your parents put on you. But for me, my real first discovery at 6 was that I was a Cyclops. Now, not Cyclops in the sense of like the character from the X-Men, but more or less a real Cyclops, right? And how that plays out is this. I have a healthy eye, which is my left eye. I have a incomplete eye, which is my right eye, right? And it's weird because if you look at the healthy eye, it has like all the veins and the cones and the retinas and all the different mechanics to have a functioning working eye. Whereas the right eye, a lot of those things I just mentioned are just not complete. So the eye is there, it's just didn't get fully developed from the inside out. Now, most people, when they're viewing the world, they have like a monocular vision and binocular vision. And typically, if you combine those two things, you get like a 190-degree-ish kind of view of the world at any point of, turning your eyes or turning your head. Now, that's like a normal person. Whether you're 2020 or 2015, it doesn't really matter, right? Now, for me, this is kind of like how I see the world. My monocular vision in my left eye is pretty complete. The binocular vision is pretty, okay. The right eye is not so much, right? It's like 5% sight. So it's almost like a peripheral extension of the left eye, but it's not a full vision. So any given moment, I'm kind of like seeing the world literally through one eye, per se. So that's, discovery number one. Discovery number two, well, I found out that I was an artist at a very, very young age, roughly about the age of 7, 6, 7 ish, that weird period. And I was reminded of that, from my mom. She sent me like this funny looking sketch here that I created. I think I was like 8 of Dr. Doolittle and his voyage, right? And it's kind of funny because looking at it, I'm like, wow, this is not so great looking drawing, but it is, I guess my first time actually trying to give structure to something that I saw on the cover of a book, right? Specifically when it comes to fonts and the image and the layout and the frame around it. And it's on like this, notebook paper, which is from like, I don't know, the early 80s. So yeah, it's cool that she kept that because, that's what moms do. They help you to remember where you started from. Now, typically how most creative kids, of any kid for that matter, not just a creative kid, their whole creative journey usually started from somewhere of expressing themselves post like this thing around self-awareness. And obviously, me drawing my hand and my name, kind of writing my name is Adrian. I probably misspelled it, but my mom more or less discovered that and was not too pleased of me writing on her wall, right? As well as, it's just something that I think most moms and most people who keep a house going, they just don't want kids just writing on everything. But, my dad, the guy on the right, he basically said, well, don't really discipline. I mean, he might be an artist, and I think he was kind of right, right? So, just kind of looking back, these two individuals more or less supported everything I wanted to be at a very young age. So even after discovering that I had creative talents, my mom was a seamstress. She basically supported me in everything, right? Buying my first airbrushes, sketch pads, getting me like classes in high school around screen printing and all kind of things around design. And my dad more or less have discovered that. Now the next group of people, I guess the next set of players would be the protectors, right? This is kind of like the siblings come in, right? This is my sister Rhonda, my brother Kenneth. He's my oldest brother. Then you got the twins, they're kind of younger than the first two. But more or less, these guys are like the protectors, right? So between Rhonda, Kenneth, Antonio, Antonine, these guys more or less just allowed me to just be me because I was, little brother per se, right? Now I think looking at where I pulled this talent from and actually, understand the origins of my creativity and my artistic skills, it definitely came from Lee Cochran, who is my grandfather on the right, and my grandmother, his wife, Gussie Bright Eye Cochran, on the left. Now, these were two vaudeville entertainers. My grandma was definitely a dancer. She was also a wrestler, so she had hands. As well as my granddad, he was a entertainer. Originally, he came from a very academic-driven family out of Talladega, Alabama, but he got into the entertainment industry via my grandma. So, I would definitely understand my creative talents come from those guys. They would tell me stories of all the different people they would tour with, right? People like Fred Astaire, Satchmo, Louis Armstrong, and obviously a guy by the name of Little Richard, who was like a very close friend of my grandma. In fact, you can even see this, hand signed photo that he sent my grandma. Supposedly, this guy would spend all kinds of evenings with my grandparents just at the house, long before I was born. Now, a lot of you guys probably don't know, but I'm from a city called Atlanta, Georgia, which is out of the South. It's the capital of Georgia. And if you think about it, when I was born in the late 70s, the mid to late 70s, Atlanta was becoming like a different kind of town, right? It was a small town on the verge of becoming like a major city. It started getting like its own rail system. The sports teams started moving in. A lot of corporations started moving in. But overall, Atlanta was coming like this, bigger city than it initially was. Definitely compared to like a Birmingham or a Memphis at the time, right? It had a new mayor, new police department, and a lot of new businesses. Basically coming to town and making the city just grow. Now, also I would, occasionally see people like Alice Walker give speeches at various bookstores throughout the city of Atlanta, which is like one of those things as an African American to have a person such as herself to just come and talk about, her new book called The Color Purple, and even the film that was produced by Spielberg with her, just giving speeches about like her life and just overall like how she approached creativity in her writing and what inspired all of that. Another thing about Atlanta is the Auburn Avenue corridor part of Atlanta, where a lot of people refer to that's like the Harlem of the South. This is where you would see, the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King got his ministry started, or he started actually, ministering, as well as the Royal Peacock, where ironically my grandparents and many other performers would actually perform at this historic venue. You obviously have like the King Center, which eventually become the resting place for MLK, as well as these statues of the Dobbs family, which is the family that Maynard Jackson more or less are descendants from. Another aspect of living in Georgia, because I often say I'm from Atlanta and not Georgia, but Atlanta is in Georgia, and in Georgia will remind you that we have a certain history that they're more or less will hang on to. Here's a state capitol flag that ironically flew from 1956 to 2001, which had a Confederate symbol. So you got to keep in mind this symbol or this flag was actually flying in the state capitol in the city of Atlanta, ironically during the 96 Olympics. So the world is here and they're seeing these different symbols of like friction and as well as things that was just not so great for certain groups of people, definitely African Americans. Another symbol you would see on the right is the stone mountain carvings of some of the Confederate generals. Humans, nonetheless, but humans with I guess, intent that wasn't so great for a lot of people, specifically African Americans overall, anything around civil rights. Another thing I got a chance to see were some of the angst around kids becoming missing in the late 80s. I mean, the early 80s, late 70s, specifically around the Atlanta missing and child murders. This artist by the name of Ralph Wardrop would more or less create these huge murals throughout the city just to remind people to be mindful of your kids, keep an eye and watch on them. And he humanized these individual kids. It was like more or less 23, 24 kids and a few adults. The kid was missing during this time, and the goal here was to remind people of their humanity. And I actually was inspired by this, actually, by these murals, which you'll probably see in a few slides that I, more or less just pull inspiration from. So, again, I pull inspiration from things like comic books, anything from the X-Men, Spider-Man, Spawn, which I was very drawn to the characters, obviously, but I was really drawn to like the branding of these different characters. So, the logos and typography and everything else. Even getting inspiration from, different artists throughout the city, where airbrush artists at the flea markets to some of the guys who drew the caricatures down the underground to even seeing like these big murals from artists like Louis Desart throughout the city. Like, this is like, just complete like inspirational, like, material that I was always would remember and hold dear to my heart. And, groups like Dungeon Family, which got other musicians like Outkast or Goody Mob and Organized Noise and a few other guys, starting into what we call the entertainment music industry. So pull a lot of inspiration from those guys, right? Now, that's Overture 1. That's kind of like the, just more or less of self-awareness and this discovery. Overture 2 goes into this idea of a cash rules everything around me. And this is where you run into like big change, right? This is where, in most cases, for me, 10 years later, I'm 16, turning 17 that year. You start dealing with a lot of things around peer pressure, hormonal changes, and even like dealing with just life stuff as a kid, right? Um, one of the biggest things I had to cope with was the loss of my father at 16. He was like maybe 45, 44, about to turn 45 when he passed from lung cancer. And, that was a real loss, but I took a lot of the things from him and I took his ambition as well as his knowledge that he, gave me and my siblings. And I put that on into like my creative work, especially when it comes to like, learning how to airbrush and learn how to draw and learn how to design, which leads to this slide here. This is me as a youngster. I got a lot of hair, right? More than I have now. I'm learning two things at the same time. I'm learning how to craft and hone my skills as a illustrator and a guy who know how to draw, right, and draw with this commercial intent, as well as learning how to use computers, specifically programs like Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and ironically Quark Express, which is kind of telling my age. But these were like some of the early layout design programs I would use to learn how to be a young designer at that age, right? But mostly in high school. Now, two people who were pivotal to helping me to hone these skills was Cheryl Bryant and this individual by the name of Ray Shedd. One was my high school design instructor, which is Mrs. Bryant, and Mr. Shedd, he was my college instructor. Ironically, she started the same program that he would eventually take over at the college I went to called DeKalb Tech in Carson, Georgia. And it's cool because I had a continuous like learning experience coming from her class into his program. And occasionally, when obviously completed both of the programs, I would come back and help out with some of the other instructors, part of OEC, which stands for Occupational Educational Center. This is the place where I would go and learn design and the commercial arts in high school for half a day and go back to my regular school for the other half of the day. Now, those two individuals introduced me to a couple of different things. They'll introduce me to like design markers and airbrushing and obviously things around like computers and software, right, which was really taken off in the 90s when it comes to like desktop publishing. But Mr. Shedd in particular introduced me to these two individuals, Charlie Palmer specifically, who had introduced me to his wife at the time, Dorothea Taylor, and they ran a design shop called TP Design. Mr. Shedd invited Charlie Palmer in to give a talk to the class, and Charlie just talked about like everything he was doing with his partner at the time, Dottie, for all the different clients he was working on, everybody from Coca-Cola to Burger King to Chevy and Ford and whomever else. But they were illustrators, right? It was hardcore illustrators and designers, and they were using even their technical skills and hand skills as artists and the technical skills with the computer and combine a lot of that to make these beautiful imagery you see here. So everything from the left is mostly Charlie's work. Most of the things on the right is some of Dorothea's work of recently. But these guys were more or less some of the early designers or African American designers that I met, and I still have a relationship with them today. I also got a chance to get introduced to certain publications like Creative Arts or CA and definitely How Magazine. And at the time in 1996, this is where the Olympics came to Atlanta. So I'm starting to see the city just get transformed just through visual identity and design and just overall just beautiful imagery from these different talents from all over the world. And the biggest thing I took away from that is that the city now started understanding the importance of like branding, color, shape, form, and overall just visual identity. Also, being informed and being inspired by certain culture events. This is one of Funk Jazz Cafe. The founder to the left is by the name of Jason Orr, who I still have a good relationship with today. And he basically started this event back in 1993. And, the goal was to just really bring a bunch of just funky, cool, creative people together and create an overall like indoor culture festival. Sometimes you would understand who would be on the stage in terms of the performers, and sometimes you wouldn't. But the goal was to just come and just check out the scene where it's going to be a poetry slam, live artist paintings, definitely like a food market, a vendor market at the bottom here, the House of Blues, or even just a surprise guest who would, more or less get with the house band at the time. Going into Overture 3, this is what I'm calling the line. And this is adulthood. So what I was doing those first two overtures, kind of like the setup. This is me just now taking everything I know and putting it to like the real world as an adulthood, as an adult designer per se. And this is where the internet kind of came in, and it's kind of like the late '90s. And this is me obviously want to make some bigger moves in my life. First thing was is that I started learning new programs because I was really interested in what this thing we call the internet or .com. So I started learning certain programs like Flash and Dreamweaver and maybe Lingo and learn how to code a little bit just so I can learn HTML. So that was like became like the new design tools at the time. One guy who more or less inspired me at the time was this guy by the name of Joshua Davis. He was this kind of renegade designer, well, programmer turned designer, who used to work for this company called Kioken, and he started his own company called PlayStation. But he would use fractal code to create these beautiful imagery, just to more or less show and just show how his artistic ideas would come to life just through code, right? And other people like him, like Fake Pilot and some of the guys at VS. These guys were more or less some of the early pioneers of making the internet very interactive and fun to more or less use, right? Especially using like flash that was, allowing it to be more interactive like games. Y2K happened, that was kind of interesting, which led to, the dot-com bubble bursting and me more or less losing my first gig or getting laid off at this company called Outweb. And this is where I, more or less had to deal with my first loss, I guess, professionally. And then right shortly after the dot-com bubble bursting, then 9/11 happened, right? So a lot of jobs had kind of dried up in the creative field. And at the time, I just needed just income to come in. So, hey, I started working at Starbucks for 2.5 years, which I acquired their infamous star skills, which was cool. But, I did what I had to do just to, stay surviving and thriving. But also during the time, I met the love of my life, Nicole Taylor. It's kind of funny. She was originally my client doing some logo work for her because she had a chocolate company. And, went from being like, hey, let's talk about these logos to like, hey, you want to go on a date? Or, hey, I kind of dig you. We should just be one unit. Or would you be my girlfriend? To like, hey, I love you. Will you actually marry me? So there it is. That's a accelerated story of how we more or less linked up. But during the time too as well, I started working back at this ad agency called 22 Squared as an art director, specifically as a digital art director, because these guys wanted to kind of grow their digital capabilities. And you're talking, this is like early 2000s. And here's a wall I helped to creative direct when the new rebranding of the company and got a bunch of my design and art friends to come in and redo the wall and give it some style. Stayed there for like 2 years, and next thing you know, I decided to move to New York, literally a year after getting married to Nicole. So there it is. That's kind of like how that Overture ends. And going from like Overture 3 to 4, there's a big gap, right? It's like a what I'm calling like this creative breakthrough. More or less about 12-year gap. Not really. I don't necessarily need to get into like all the things I've worked on in between there and moving to New York and turning 37, but overall, I want to just kind of get to like the real big creative breakthroughs. I've, obviously had this awakening, had some inspirational, had some enrichment, and I moved. And then now I kind of get into like what I call like this, creative breakthroughs and innovation. Here is where I'm, now getting more into like real hardcore product design. I'm reflecting on humanity through art as well as think about how design works in like film. Some of the first things I worked on when it comes to like hardcore product design was a product or a project that I first worked on joining IBM. And it was around banking, and it was around banking on a wearable, specifically the Apple Watch when it first launched in 2014. Now, funny thing about that particular project, we didn't have any real watches because Apple wasn't going to give us any. So we had to kind of rethink how we're going to actually design for a wearable, which means that everything we knew about design, even when it comes to digital, we had to really throw that out the window. We had to really think about what's the most important thing that a person wants to see with the capabilities at the time, which was a glance of their account, which is at any moment they can twist their wrist and they can see how much is in their account or how much they are spending, right? Funny thing, being that designing on a computer and designing for a watch are two totally different things. So, hey, we decided why not get these things printed up like 3D prints some watches. I found some files online, sent it to the local UPS store, which ironically had a 3D printer. And we had about like 9 of these around the office where a lot of us can paste our designs on just to understand the form factor, understand what we're designing for, and see how the designs will play out. Around about the same time, a lot of things was happening in culture when it comes to like police brutality as well as with unarmed citizens, specifically unarmed black men. Here's a picture of Sean Bell, who unfortunately was, shot and killed day before his wedding. He was shot at 50 times by some undercover policeman who thought he was, dealing with contraband, but turned to come to find out that he actually had none of those things that they say that he did, as well as a couple other different guys. Jonathan Farrell at the top right, you got Trayvon Martin in the very bottom, and then you got a Michael Brown, and then here you got Eric Garner. And it's funny, most of these things I would post online and just tag people in it and not really think about it. But it led me to meeting this guy, Spike Lee, ironically. He saw the work on Instagram, which is the power of social at the time. And he asked for permission to repost the Eric Garner piece specifically. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to tell him no. I said, of course. And that led to us actually working on some things at his headquarters in Brooklyn, where we more or less created an outdoor memorial for all these different people that was unfortunately life ended because of police brutality. Ironically, going from that particular just quick cool project, um, Spike would hit me up with various things throughout the years, and it's funny. He just kind of not give you a full picture of what he's looking for. He gave a few things. He's like, "Hey, I need you to do a visual of Michael Jackson off the wall," and that was kind of like the brief. I was like, "Okay, well, let me give you 9, maybe 10 different ways of reinterpreting off the wall through color, typography, illustration, form, design." Right. Then at some point, I wouldn't hear back from him. Then I hear back from him. He would say like, "Well, what we're going to do is create." A poster design or one sheet for a film I'm working on because he's a film director guy, and it was basically for Michael Jackson's journey from Motown to Off the Wall. A coming of age documentary that really chronicles how he went from being a little childhood teenage kid star to the rock star, right, with the album Off the Wall. This is me showing you how I took the typography and took a lot of the different fonts from the original sketch to create the part that says journey from Motown 2 to make the whole actual name of the film. And then I took that and I basically created the poster layout design based on some inspiration I pulled from like Italian poster designs. I was only able to just use this one image for rights usage on their state. Basically said we can only use this image. So I wanted to show an image of Mike going from like this colorful, young, vibrant kid to like this Pop's rock star who's using his fame and his talents to be Michael Jackson that we knew him to be, right? The left side is the theatrical release for the Sundance poster, and the one on the right is the real full-on theatrical release for things that went to streaming. I also got a chance to work on the actual DVD cover as well as things that was put out in social as well. Now, if you're gonna do anything for Michael Jackson, Prince is something. This guy named Prince that you all may know is a big, big fan amongst a lot of people. Definitely with Spike Lee. Spike asked me to create like these 9 imagery. Here I can only show 6 prints that he wanted to use on social to kind of get the word out about his block party that he was doing for Prince. That same block party got filmed with the intent to be used for his series on Netflix called She's Gotta Have It, which was like a episodic take on his very first film, She's Gotta Have It. I also worked on some designs for his film Chirac. Here's the logo I created, as well as this visual that ran in the film itself, and a couple other miscellaneous imagery. Whereas this square that was used on Instagram, some of the wild postings at the top right, as well as this beautiful graphic of a map of America that uses firearms to kind of make the different states. Created out an illustrator and got it actually in the film, as well as some other things with the logo work for the Five Bloods, as well as actually designing a moleskin based on She's Gotta Have It. Going to overture number 5. Now, this is where, I'm talking about like these things around midlife shifts. At the time I'm 42, I'm kind of going through some things, right? Brand new stages of my life, a lot of uncertainty, and I actually wanted to get into like learning more about patent design, right? Now, the stages part of this is that I became a father. Me and Nicole had a son by the name of Garvey Crown Franks. As you can see here, this is him, like, fresh out, just chilling, want to know what's going on. This is also him in the middle, maybe about 6, 7 months down the road. I'm a big fan of hats, so it'd be kind of funny to, take a picture with him with using my hats. As well as this is him, me and him at the park, just kind of checking out some drumming. So that's, more or less me becoming a father and now, navigating a whole lot of new landscape around the uncertainty of fatherhood, which lead me to doing a podcast with a couple of my friends who are already fathers by the name of Kamal Ware and Kamal Kapaweezy. And Kamal Kapaweezy he wanted us to start this podcast called The Stages, where 3 different fathers talk about their current ways of navigating the world as fathers with their sons. And, that's their kids were like obviously a lot older than Garvey, but it's kind of cool. We recorded that for about 2 years, maybe like a year or so, maybe a year and a half. And then Out of nowhere, boom, COVID hit, right? Again, this is the part of this life of uncertainty, right? I mean, Garvin's not at the time, only like a year old, maybe a year and a half. He just started walking. This new disease hit. We're all at home now. We kind of like trying to figure out what's next, right? Nobody wants to catch this disease and potentially die from, it, especially me, having a new kid, right? But nonetheless, during all this kind of time uncertain, I got a chance to reflect on things that I want to do besides just, do a bunch of things around like, commercial design. I really want to move more into like actual physical product design. And I got to think about some of the angst and some of the pain points I have in life in terms of like, navigating the world. There are people in the world who are partially blind, well, more blind than I guess you can consider some of the issues that I've gone through. And maybe that's a better way to help them navigate the world. And I thought about like, is there a way that we could take like really cool glasses and some of these sketches I was producing around eyewear and turn it into a useful system for navigating, right? Maybe using, LiDAR cameras or like a GPS and definitely like haptic feedback to kind of help a person more or less navigate certain, terrains and certain environments. And I got a chance to work with a couple of people, which is in the next slide. We thought about like, could we use beacons? Could we use public, camera data? Could we use public and private Wi-Fi, GPS, and even phones to kind of create this triangulated kind of like system to help a person create this vision grid? And we thought about this thing called field of vision. And, some people I work with by the name of Jennifer Hatfield and Data, we more or less thought about like a good use case for creating like a navigation system through eyewear. And this is roughly about like 2000, maybe 2001, give or take. And after that, we filed for the patent. It didn't get awarded, but it allowed us to become what they call inventors at IBM. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I wanted to kind of take this a step further. I wanted like, hey, well, can we take this idea and actually prototype it? And that led me to create these frames called the Machinist, kind of, naming it after my father who was a master machinist, right? The original Iron Man. I put out a lot of sketches on social media again. This guy by the name of Tom Kabash saw some of the things I was doing with the sketches as well as some of these navigational ideas around eyewear and wanted to kind of help out. And we collaborated on some of my sketches and made them a lot more tight since he's a product designer, specifically with eyewear for like the last, 20 plus years or so. He saw a lot of the sketches, providing him vectors in Illustrator. He took those vectors and put them in 3D modeling programs. And ultimately, you get what we have these really cool prototype eyewear that I feel are kind of cool. They're very stylish, but they also 3D printed too. So they're kind of sustainable as well. So I don't know, maybe in the future, we could try to figure out how to put some technology in it, right? And there are companies already doing that, but yeah, that's some of the thinking. Here's another project I worked on with this guy by the name of Kamal Ware and Pope Phoenix. Long story short, Kamal Ware on the left, one of the guys from the stages, have this thing called Black Gotham Experience or BGX, and he would do these walking tours of Lower Manhattan that kind of give like talking points and landmarks of where African Americans or at the time newly imported Africans impact to at the time what's called New Amsterdam, which has now been named as Manhattan. This guy had this exhibit called the Land of the Blacks, and he had an opportunity to put a lot of this beautiful imagery that he created for BGX on a larger scale, which was the billboards of Westfield. Now, being that I understood how advertising out of home billboards work, me and him partner on like bringing his imagery, Pope's imagery, and some of my imagery together to create like this long immersive wall. Here is an example of that playing out with some of the things that Kamal would create with like the images of his grandparents and the maps, me creating like this, tapestry of some of the characters from his walking tours that are in the middle, and some of the things that Pope would actually create, and making like this really long, immersive one image that covered the size of a football field down at the Oculus Westfield. Here's another piece I created, of some of the characters from his walking tours. And we basically took over a couple different screens in Westfield, roughly about 20 to 30 screens, And some of those screens incorporated some of Pope's imagery and some of my imagery. And the goal here was to kind of use the space as really like a public art space, right? Almost turned into like a gallery to talk about Land of the Blanks. Now, moving on into the last overture and kind of wrapping this up. This is where I start thinking about like my encore. Now, I'm 47 currently, and it's not like I'm getting ready to retire. I mean, obviously, working here, we're about retirement, but I am thinking about like how do I leave a gift for the world? It's now that I've done all these different things throughout my career. The goal here would be is to think about not just Garvey, but obviously Garvey now is a 6 year old, but what would Garvey would need in the future? And the future is not like this off in the distance, but it's about the things he's going to need going forward into adulthood. And the goal here is to make his life better, but not just his life, but the people around him, right? The environment, the earth, the neighborhood he lives in, the teachers that he's going to encounter, the different kids that are his friends. Like, how do I take my talents as a creative and designer and make this worthwhile and make it a gift that I can leave for future generations of human beings? One other thing I got a chance to do was actually see some work that I created roughly about 11 years ago get inducted into the Smithsonian. This guy by the name of Byron Lewis, he started this agency called Uniword Group back in 1971. So long story short, this guy is one of the first African Americans to start an agency, specifically with the intent of multicultural marketing. And roughly about 10 years ago, he was inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame. So working at this agency at the time with this creative director and writer by the name of Shaitan, we basically had to create an ad for him to kind of highlight who he was. So, long story short, we took every possible word that somebody would have called Mr. Lewis, whether it's a good word or a bad word, and created this image of him using like this word cloud. And the biggest word that we can call out would say that he was a Hall of Famer, right? And that image that we created for his advertising induction was actually used 10 years later to be incorporated into the Smithsonian. So it's kind of like a permanent exhibit of his accomplishments from, some of the clients he's worked with, like, the Three Musketeers, Mars, and everything he's done for like Ford, as well as other different clients too. So kind of cool to have some work, advertising, design work to be in the Smithsonian. It just kind of happened, and I take that. Also, I want to bring back some of the ideas I worked on with the field of vision, right? I've been pulling inspiration from the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, right? Because they're kind of doing exactly what we wanted to do a while ago now. Is how can we take that idea and maybe iterate into some of the things I've, prototyped with the eyewear, right? Because I do want to make this navigation system, I want to see it come to life. Don't know how it's going to happen, but it's an ambition of mine, right? Something I can leave behind and give for the planet and for society. And obviously, knowledge transfer. I like to occasionally go and give these talks and one-on-one discussions with some kids, definitely in art and design. And I figured, you know, given all the things that I've done over the last, almost 30 years as a designer and a creative, it's always best to give that knowledge back to future humans because they are the guys, they are the women, they are the individuals who are going to literally change the world, right? And make the world a lot better than what we've done as well as really make the world a better place. Now, wrap this up. Initially, you said personal vision is what you want to accomplish in your life, both personal and professional. I thought about it, kind of did my own amendment. Personal vision really is a belief with actions and foresight that has a certain sense of rhythm. And I would say that for anybody who's viewing this deck, hopefully that you find your rhythm in life and the things that you're passionate and the ideas that you want to pursue and the visions that you may have. Approach it with a certain sense of rhythm and have fun with it and, play your own music while you're doing it. And that's just kind of it. Thank you.